Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is Multifamily Chronicles, and I'm your host, Adrian Danila. My guest today is Dominic Beveridge. Welcome to the show, Dom.
Thank you for having me.
Dom, just to start, right, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm an industry consultant. I've been in multifamily for about 10 years. My company is 20 for 20, which is a consultancy and a publishing firm that basically finds information out about technology, about operations, and tries to explain things to the industry that it could benefit from understanding better.
So, would you like to be a little more detailed about 2420, like, the white paper that you produce every year, just to get the audience more familiarized with your work?
Yeah, well, so the white paper became an annual thing, but it's basically a sort of point in time at the end of each year. I get a group of 20 executives that represent the breadth of the industry. So everyone from like the biggest fee managers to sort of 5,000 unit owner operators, and as much as I can in between. It's 10 heads of operations, so COOs typically, and 10 heads of technology. And the idea is you ask everybody the same questions. You spend a fair bit of time preparing what questions you're going to ask, because you want to make sure that you're asking about stuff that's top of mind, like right now. You go through these 20 interviews, and then you basically synthesize what people tell you into a set of findings, and that's what the white paper is about. And it seems to have some usefulness as a sort of read on what people are working on and what's going on in the market.
One of the topics that I've seen in your white paper, and also it's like a hot topic, right? All over the social media, LinkedIn mainly, right? That's where I hang out to get the industry insights, is centralization for the industry. I want you to weigh in a little bit about what are the trends that you see based on the executives that you have interviewed, right? And also, once we go over the general state of centralization, I like to be specific and maybe discuss a little bit about maintenance centralization and what does that mean for the industry.
Yeah, so I've been diving fairly deep on centralization for the last couple of years. But it's like 2 years ago, because it was obvious that some companies had started to take radical steps towards centralizing functions like leasing, for example. I wanted, I sort of thought that well, everybody is now going to want to do the same thing. So if there's a continuum from today to this future state where we've got centralized leasing operations, for example, everyone is going to be at some point on that continuum. So that was the assumption that I made going into the interviews like 2 years ago. And what I found was that there is no continuum. The continuum doesn't make sense. Like every company doesn't have the same opportunity to centralize things, right? So if you don't have properties that are close together, it's quite hard to truly centralize leasing, because you can't share leasing agents between properties. And even if you do have density, if, for example, you're a big fee manager, you don't control everything about how your properties run, right? Your owners do, and which means that you don't have the same opportunity that some of the sort of REITs and those companies had when they made these they made these changes to their organizations. So when I looked at that set of things, it was more like there's a sort of 2x2 matrix where, depending on how close together your properties are and how much you control your environment, that basically determines what your opportunity is for centralization. So that was one thing. So this year, then I wanted to get deeper into trying to understand what people are actually doing, right? So we sort of conceptualized it a year earlier, and now I wanted to know just brass tacks what's going on. And we found a couple of things, right? So we bucketed centralization into 3 areas of property management. So leasing is the thing that everybody talks about. We've got a property admin, so the stuff that we normally associate with the assistant property manager. And then we've got maintenance. So we looked at each of those 3 things separately. Unsurprisingly, leasing was by far the biggest priority when you ask the question that way of the respondents. But when you ask the question differently, when you ask, what did you do in 2022 and what are you planning to do in 2023, you see this very different picture of what people are working on. You find that in the case of leasing, although people are rolling out like leasing technologies that support centralization, most of them aren't really centralizing. Very few companies are actually centralizing leasing operations, at least so far. When you look at admin, the assistant property management role, that's the real story of centralization right now. That's the role that people are really taking offsite. Lots of reasons why it makes sense to do that. And then you look at maintenance, where generally, the prize of being able to centralize maintenance, so anything that would add flexibility into your staffing model, because we know that maintenance is the hardest area to be fully staffed. So the sort of payback for managing to centralize maintenance functions is the highest of those three categories, but it's the lowest in terms of activity. And I think it's because it's difficult, right? Maintenance is a harder thing to do. Like you can't transfer skills from a high rise to a garden style property in the same way that you can with like accounting or leasing or some other skill like that. So it's a difficult thing to do. There's all sorts of interesting like constraints in maintenance. So you know, if you've roughly got one person who knows how to fix elevators or HVAC or something in each property, you don't want to have any fewer than one person per property who can do that, because you know, you could pull resources between properties, but what if you had the same problem at every property at the same time? You'd now create this really big problem for you that you don't have today. So there's lots of reasons why you know, companies maybe don't you see that as being too difficult and want to push that to the end of the centralization journey. That makes sense to me as well. But generally, I think my read on the executives that I spoke to is that lots of executives are kind of looking for a palatable next step that they could take with maintenance, and they probably just haven't seen it yet.
One of the observations that I had over the years, and I guess the challenges that I've seen in like taking maintenance to the next step, right, to the next level, as far as improving services, doing things like, you know, more present 2023 versus like, you know, 1990. It's that at the top level, at the executive level, maintenance is seen solely as cost. In other words, okay, it's not something that we could improve and make us more money or save us money, but it's strictly a cost. And what happens typically with the cost is that, how do we minimize cost? So when you have this mindset of minimizing cost, there's no way you're gonna invest in something that, you know, it's already a cost to you, because that means spending more money. It's your perception of the same type of challenges at this level when you ask about maintenance? Like, do you get the same feeling that I've been getting for years, that there is kind of the main, like the mindset challenge, right? Not the practical challenge, but the way it's seen.
Yeah, no, I would actually take it a step further than that. It's not that simply that they see it as a cost, because centralizing maintenance could benefit in fact, people who are making progress on it, you can tell it very much does benefit them from a cost perspective, which means you should do it, right? The challenge is not so much that people see it as a cost. The challenge is that everybody sees it as a fixed cost. So they don't. The parallel that I draw in the white paper is between single family and what people are doing with maintenance centralization, right? So in single family, it's also a cost, maintenance. The thing is, it behaves like a direct cost rather than a fixed cost, right? So in single family, every time a work order comes in, somebody has to decide who's doing this work, when is it going to be done, how much should it cost. All right, in multifamily, we've just developed this coverage model where in a 300 unit property, there are 3 maintenance techs. They are a sunk cost, right? So you know, the work orders come in, their time gets consumed. You don't really have very strong incentives to get better at changing the way that they do their work. In single family, if you can save on, you know, if you can aggregate information about what it costs you to do different kinds of work, you can figure out cheaper ways to do it, right? And you have to do that because every time a work order comes in, you're having to make some decisions. In multifamily, where you don't have to make any of those decisions at all, where is the impetus to get better, for example, at balancing proactive versus reactive maintenance? Logically, it makes all the sense in the world to stop stuff from breaking rather than fix broken stuff. But if maintenance is just a fixed cost, I don't really get any benefit from doing that. So why would I burn that many calories and getting better at it? You see what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. That is one of the reasons, I guess, in general, as an industry, we're not doing a great job. It's not just like that there's no funds, but even when you properly budget for some dollar numbers for preventive maintenance on a quarterly basis, the emphasis is not on doing it. Like, we're not making a point of doing it, even though it's in a budget. We try to postpone it as much as we can. And I think that's probably just like a general way of looking at, preventive maintenance, as not seeing the value into, like you said, cleaning a coil, getting a unit tuned up before it breaks down, because when it breaks down, you might just need a whole entire unit when it comes to HVAC. If you were to do the maintenance, the proper maintenance on it, you might prolong the life of it by 1, 2, or 3, or 5 years. So, there's definitely a benefit, but for some reason, we're not really seeing it. It's not that obvious right there. So Dom, you mentioned the single family model in maintenance, right? I would like to ask you, where is the opportunity for multifamily to take from the single family model? What are some things that we could actually learn from them and actually implement successfully in our business model?
Well, I wrote an article recently in Units magazine about this, where I actually talked about some companies that are making real sort of tangible headway on this. And there are two different things, two different models that I talked about. One is the model where you take turns out of the scope of regular maintenance. So if you sort of think about what maintenance departments do in multifamily, you can broadly split it into three chunks, right? There's business as usual, just dealing with work orders. There's proactive maintenance, which you have more flexibility as a schedule, and then you've got turns, which is this it's this very sort of spiky. Sometimes you have lots of them to do. Sometimes you have none of them to do. Kind of work, which is also predictable, right?
Yes.
When leases come up to expire, so you can sort of see this big wave of work coming at some point in the future, and you can see when you're not going to have any of that work to do. And that kind of lends itself to an outsourcing model. So you've seen this in fact, Equity have written articles about this before, that they have been outsourcing turns to a third party. So if you sort of think about that, well, that makes the problem of the rest of maintenance smaller, right? So I'm not constantly being distracted by these projects that I have to do. I can now think much more in terms of how much of my time do I spend doing, answering work orders, how much of my time do I spend doing proactive stuff. So that making the problem kind of smaller by outsourcing to a third party, which again, in single family, because you have to think about who's going to do this work. You don't have on-premise staff, so every time you've got some work to do, you have to decide who's going to do it. That tends to mean you've got more of a mix of vendors versus sort of W-2 employees that are at your disposal to do this work. So that's one sort of model that I think is interesting. The other one, though, is more sort of simple. And I use the example, so Goldrich Kest was the company that we went into in some detail in the article. What they've been doing is simply changing the management structure of maintenance. So rather than having maintenance techs report into a community manager, you have them report into a regional head of maintenance. So it's a very sort of low tech thing. It's much more about marshalling the skills that you've got across a pool of properties. And what you find when you can do that is again, that for me is very much more like a a single family model. I mean, those people happen to be assigned to individual properties, but they're sort of behaving the way that you would in single family, where you're looking at your phone and figuring out what job you've got to go to today. And what they find is that having a sort of pool of resources available to somebody who understands how to solve maintenance problems means that you stop wasting money on stuff like, if a door stop is broken in this property, well, we have to go get a vendor to come fix it. Well, if there's somebody in a sister property that knows how to fix that problem, I can send them to fix that problem whenever it comes up at one of those properties. And every time one of my own resources does that, I save maybe $500 from a contractor. And you can imagine how savings like that sort of stack up over time, and that for me is a much more, if you've got properties that are close enough together, it's a much more sort of palatable step. It doesn't require that you master any technology really. It just means that you're changing the reporting lines, and you're starting to think much more sort of strategically about what is the best way to do this work.
So I think in a way, by changing whom the site maintenance personnel reports to, we could call it in a way centralized, right? Because they're gonna answer to this, regional maintenance director, or whomever is like part of a regional team. But is really outsourcing some of the work? Would it be proper for us to define it as centralization, or is just like a rearranging of? So isn't this like too, I guess, broad of a word? And I'm not, to debate semantics here, but I don't want for people to, when they're thinking about centralizing, my first thought, right, when I'm thinking about centralizing, is that work is going to be done from a command center. It's going to be managed from a command center. So from what I'm getting from, from your studies and from the feedback that you've been getting, like it's very little of centralization. Most of it is just like finding more efficient ways to do things, but it's not necessary centralization. So outsourcing terms will not be, to me, right? I wouldn't label as that. Am I wrong in saying this?
No, you're absolutely right. So I think one of the things that was in the white paper this year is that centralization does feel like a bit of a misnomer, right? It feels like it's not quite the right word. I think there's a couple of things that are not that helpful about it, because some of the tasks, so outsourcing turns is a really good example. I mean, it's quite a solid way of achieving the kind of outcome that people are looking for when they embark on this project of centralization. But is it centralized? I mean, the fact that you outsource something to a third party, we have a name for that already, right? It's outsourcing, right? So calling it centralization for me is maybe a little bit confusing. The other thing I notice is when people talk about centralization, they really tend to think about technology. And the thing is, the people who are good at this, like the people who, even if you look at something like leasing, which has a much stronger technology requirement to it, the people who have really made progress on it are the ones that get that this is not a technology problem. It's a people and process problem first that's enabled by technology. So the thing is, when we talk about centralization, I think people jump to thinking about centralization related technology, and it completely colors the way that they think about it. You're much better off thinking about this in terms of, right, what's the people and process outcome I'm trying to drive. I mean, when you look at maintenance, like again, the amount of technology that you have to implement to achieve this stuff is minimal, right? This is far more to do with how I manage my resources and how I design my processes than it is to do with I need to roll out the system.
Yeah, so technology came up in our conversation already. You mentioned it a few times. I have a question for you regarding technology. How can we actually leverage technology to support? And I'm on a pause right here because I'm using the same word, which is maybe not a word we want to use, centralization efforts in multifamily maintenance, right? But I guess reimagining or reinventing multifamily maintenance, right? I'm not gonna call it centralizations because I think, we already determined there is not necessary that, where it could be a little bit of that in a case that you just mentioned, where they change the reporting structure, but everything else is just like finding different ways, better ways maybe to address something like turnkey, but not, that's not centralization, what we would call stricto sensu. So I'm gonna give you the opportunity here to maybe share a few ways in which we could use technology to leverage on our behalf. I mean, to our advantage.
Yeah. So one of the things that really interests me about maintenance tech, if you think about all of the competitor maintenance products that are technology products that are out there in multifamily, they're all really different from each other. Like they come at the problem in completely different ways. Like the difference between maintenance platforms is much bigger, in my opinion, than the difference between, CRMs or property management or any of those sort of whose framing is quite kind of consistent. If I think about the types of technologies that can help us to achieve this outcome that we're calling centralization. So again, if we think about the sort of use cases that we talked about, so how do you make multifamily maintenance work more like single family, where you've got greater flexibility, greater accountability, greater ability to push the right resources towards the right jobs. I think that's a problem of just gathering data from the bottom up and using it to analyze what kinds of work that we do, right? So if I think about going back to the Goldridge example, like one of the things that they were telling me was that we could imagine a world where one of our employees just does HVAC. So in a particular cluster of properties, we own a truck and it has an inventory of HVAC repair stuff on it, and somebody's job is to drive around our properties just doing HVAC. Like that's the kind of job that we'll have in the future. And you can imagine other kinds of specialized tasks like that you'd have in a more sort of centralized environment. Well, how do you get there? Well, I think the answer is you have to understand what jobs overall. If I'm looking at the individual jobs that people are doing across the course of a year, first of all, how many jobs like this? How long do they take? What kind of skills, supplies, etc. do they take? Is this a job that's better done by a third party, by an external vendor? Is it a job? Is there enough of this kind of work that we could have a W-2 employee of our own doing this kind of work? The answers to all of those questions lie in building up this picture of all of the work that you do in maintenance from the bottom up in a way that we don't right now. Like we don't do that with work orders in multifamily. We have a very sort of transactional view of, a work order is a sort of communication thing that assigns somebody to a job. But if you build the picture from the bottom up, and you create this data set that enables you to understand the breakdown of your work and start making more strategic decisions about how you do it. Then on top of that, you add the sort of communication layer that allows you to collaborate, for example, with external vendors, right? So being better at managing your vendors, having a bench of credential vendors in a given market that you can then match to these kinds of work that you've built this picture of. Technology that works like that, of which there is some, interestingly, coming from single family. I think that kind of technology is the layer that you would put on a company that's trying to run their maintenance more flexibly.
Yeah, that's great insight, and I do agree with you, right? I stepped out of multifamily for a year, so I've done single family. I'm familiar enough with the single family space to just kind of confirm that there are some models and resources that we could actually import into multifamily and just make things better for us. They're already working out there because they don't have the luxury of having someone assigned to a property that lives right around the corner or right in the backyard of their tenants. The single family, for the most part, institutionally, is scattered all over town. So there's a lot of windshield time, a lot of gas money spent in driving. So then they have no choice but to make things as efficient as they can, given the circumstance that they're in, right? So they had to run things more, and I think specializing, like just having that decision tree clearly defined. Hey, is this gonna go to a vendor, to a third party, or do we handle it in-house with our in-house techs? I think that's a big deal, and this could may actually help benefit multifamily if they're willing to embrace this type of model, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so there are a couple of other interesting. So I can think of a couple of other examples of technology that exists out there in the marketplace right now. Another one though is the model. The model where you run, where you've got this sort of project management layer to the software. So it's and again, if you think about turns in particular, so what happens with turns is that they're this little each turn is a project which contains a set of tasks that have to be implemented. All right, well, the individual tasks are fairly trivial, right? If you in the scheme of things. So if I'm this regional maintenance director and I'm trying to manage turns in a property, it's no good to look at like individual work orders and stuff. That's you're going to get lost in that detail. So that means I need some way to group these tasks into projects, and I need things like exception-based reporting that's going to simply allow me to track. There might be dozens of turns going on at the same time. I need a simple way to keep track of whether or not each of these turn projects is running on time or not. So again, the more sort of project management orientated technology, I think, is helpful for that model. I can think of other types of work to which that would apply as well. And then the other one, the final one that springs to my mind is the I'm actually going to talk about the AppFolio example. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but they actually have an AI maintenance sort of triage and dispatch capability, which again is it's very much modeled on the way that you do this in single family and in smaller multifamily. But what the technology is doing in this case is I'm going to manage the interaction with the customer, right, with the resident. So the resident is going to text, and then an AI is going to have the conversation that gets the information out of them and tells them what's going to happen and so on. What we're then also going to do is we're going to triage that work and also do the dispatch part of it. So because you've got an AI that's able to sort of optimize it knows which vendors it can use, it knows your policy, it knows what constitutes a priority. So it's going to act on the data that it gets in the conversation with the residents. And it's going to handle basically the whole triage and dispatch of maintenance resources to get problems solved. So again, when I look at that, if multifamily could get to an environment where it worked more like that, that would be really solid progress. Because the AI handles the interactions really well. The AI is always available. The AI you don't need to train the AI, so you don't have problems where this person didn't realize that we're not using that vendor anymore. Like you get rid of all of the problems like that, and you just have this means of running maintenance that's just much easier to manage. So those are three different ways where I see technology potentially improving maintenance.
So I've been, through my work, I've been exposed to several pieces of prop tech that, do maintenance, right? That manage maintenance. I will say that generally speaking, most of the technology that's been developed out there deals with workflow. In other words, whether it's work order or make ready, how do we create one? how do we complete one? How do we put the proper notes? How do we schedule when it comes to, either one of them? And then how do we complete? But outside of that, I'll say that, I haven't seen much of much progress, right? And I could think of a couple of areas where a piece of prop tech will be really helpful for the end user. One will be the ability to order and make it like a frictionless process. In other words, I'm going to pick up my phone, right? The app is on my phone, and I'm going to go ahead and determine what parts I need for a job, or what parts I need today, right? Basically go to the maintenance shop, scan some barcodes where I'm seeing that my inventory is low, and with a click of the button, I just place an order. That'll be one thing. I don't see much of that available, that being developed. And the other one is resources for end user. In other words, okay, let's say that we have a group of maintenance techs, we have a large company that's using my tech. Why do I not want to develop some how-to videos that are like very short, 2 to 3 minutes long, and to put them on an app right there for the text? It's kind of like the YouTube concept, right? But on a YouTube, the concept, one of the problem with the YouTube is that you got to search by word, so that's gonna take you a minute. And secondly, the content is not really vetted, right? You could be good information, but you don't know. Like if you don't know, you don't know, right? You're looking for the answers, but how do you know that that's the right answer? So for companies to create like a small section right there with how-to videos, I think that'll help them tremendously. And the model exists not in a virtual world, not in an app world, but exists into MRO vendors. They all offer free training classes. Like if you go to HD Supply or you name it, Lowe's Pro, they have a long list of training classes that they offer for free to their customer. Why not develop like a library section in an app that's maintenance, that's serving maintenance, it's used for maintenance, to help the text like that? To me, that'll be an amazing selling point. I'm not sure what the cost will be to that, but I think I can think that it'll be so high. And every time I bring it up to someone that develops an app, they're like, no, we're just doing workflow. I understand that that's what you're doing, but it's like an added service that will make your app more appealing. What's your take on that, Don?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good one. The other you're right. It's not always, in fact, it's frequently not about technology. Like another really good example is what HappyCo is doing at the moment with Happy Force, right? So there you've got you've got an application that really started as something that was targeted at inspections, right? So it's this really nice piece of software that was originally conceived to go take photos of stuff and record information and so on. But what they've done is they've now put this layer of service on top of their platform, where the problem that they're solving is they have remote maintenance techs who field incoming calls, and they can troubleshoot stuff on the phone with residents, right? So they could even the human can even gauge what the residents' appetite is to. Okay, well, if you like, I can order the parts off Amazon, and when they arrive, I can tell you how to fix it, right? So that's very often a better solution than you send in your work order and you wait for a maintenance tech to come around and show you how to do it. So yeah, you can imagine there are some things. I mean, I do it all the time. When something goes wrong in my house, I go look up a YouTube tutorial, and 9 times out of 10, I can fix it, right? So I can definitely I can definitely see how that you're building that into the technology platform would be smart. But I also kind of love this idea of having remote maintenance techs like troubleshoot stuff on the phone with people. I think that was good service if I were a resident in a multifamily community.
Well, the model exists in IT, right? So when you buy a computer or a PC and it's not working, the first thing, when you call customer service, they're gonna tell you to restart, right? And most of the times that solves the problem. Of course, they could get into more troubleshooting with you. The same goes with the cable companies. They don't just dispatch techs out there. So I think that part is very useful and very helpful. I just don't think that it goes too deep into troubleshooting. I had a very terrifying experience back when I was a maintenance tech. A resident called and said, my faucet is leaking, I can't stop the water. So I try to tell them that there's some angle stops, some shutter valves, like inside their cabinet, right under the sink. They could just turn those off until I get dressed. I happen to live on site, so I was 10 minutes away, because they weren't too specific. They made it sound like it's gonna flood the apartment, and I knew the apartment had like 3 apartments below it, and that was like a very scary thought, right? Like, you imagine tens of thousands of dollars in damage. So the response was like, I tried, you won't stop the water. So apparently valve's not working. So I'm getting dressed, I'm going over there, and I said, okay, so could you show me how you try to stop the water? And they're looking at a valve that sticks out of the wall, and instead like turning it clockwise, they were pushing it up against the wall, thinking that that's how you stop it. And that was a CPVC pipe. So luckily for me, they didn't break the pipe. Like literally, that would have cost tens of thousands of dollars in damage. And that is a terrifying thought for anyone that's in maintenance or in maintenance management or in management purely for that reason. So that is kind of scary, right? I think that the Happy Co is trying some great things, and some of them, like the basic troubleshooting, could be very helpful. It could save a lot of money, but you have to be careful how deep you want to go.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and liability generally is a thing. You can talk someone through how to fix their toilet, but then they drop the cistern lid on their foot, and now you've now you've got a different problem.
I'm not against trying it, like I said, and I think for basic things it's wonderful, because if you skim off the top of your workload, let's say 10-15% are very, very easy things, like reset a breaker, do this, do the other. I think it's worth, right? Just eliminating those trips, even if it's multifamily, even if it's on site, right? That you have a staff on site, but the fact that they don't have to go to like 15% of the calls, and they being handled virtually by like a virtual tech, I think there's a lot of value in that. So for sure, I'm gonna be looking forward to see what progress they're making with the app and how successful it's gonna be, because definitely there's value in it. There's some value in it. So
the other thing I understand is that so out of hours maintenance calls. I hadn't really appreciated this, but just the vast majority, sort of well above 70% of all out of hours maintenance calls are non-urgent. Right. So when you have the ability to troubleshoot stuff on the phone, you realize stuff is like the stuff that you talked about. It's stuff that can wait till tomorrow. It's stuff that just means, just here's the reset button, like kind of maintenance. Like, and you do have this problem, right? If you're sending text to people when a call comes in, that's the worst part of the job. That's the least attractive part of being maintenance tech, is the fact that you have all of this out of hours stuff that you have to do. So if you can find that you don't need to do that, that's a win as well, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And it also helps with employee retention too. I conduct a lot of polls on LinkedIn and Facebook groups that are related to multifamily maintenance, and I could tell you one of the top 3 concerns or complaints from maintenance techs is being on call. So if we could reduce the times that they had to go out on a call, after hours to do whatever they need to do, I think that in itself, it'll be a huge help. It'll help with employee retention on a maintenance side, if nothing else. Besides, not to even mention, the economical part, because you don't have to pay that person, you don't have to pay their mileage, you don't have to, pay for their time. If you could push it until the next working day, if it's a legit reason for it, and that could wait, like, let's make it wait until the next day. So you mentioned a couple of things, Dom, about who does maintenance better. I won't say who does maintenance centralization better, but who does maintenance better in a context of centralization, or like doing things differently. Do you have any more examples that you could share with the audience of who does things differently, like other than just like the regular, hey, 1 man per 100 units and they just handle whatever they can handle, we're gonna outsource?
I do. Well, I mean, so there aren't that many examples of this. So and the ones that I mentioned are probably the only ones that I know are public about what they're doing. Sorry, this completely escaped me just then. So generally, the companies that I think so the other example I used in the article was a company called Home River, who are based out of Idaho, I think. And what's interesting about companies like that is they're very sort of acquisitive companies that have sort of taken over portfolios of properties. That's kind of how they've grown. And what they were telling me about, what they had found was that when they acquire a portfolio of assets, the assets are different, right? They have different maintenance requirements. And so they've arrived at this very much sort of one size does not fit all kind of model. They were using the technology they were using was that thing I described earlier on, where you build the picture of your maintenance from the bottom up. That was a company called Property Meld, I think was the IT platform that they were using. But the interesting thing is when you've got a mixture of single family plus smaller multifamily plus regular multifamily, you actually have quite a lot more innovation in that network of properties, because you just have a lot of different problems that you had to solve. But yeah, Home River seemed to me to be an example of a company that was trying to build a picture of what it needed from the bottom up, and figuring out from there what is the best way to address this all of this work that I have to do.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, we had a previous conversation, and I also saw it in your white paper that you just published this year. Fragmentation, right? Is this a real challenge? How big of a challenge is fragmentation in ownership for PropTech developers, right? Because if you
so the thing that I think I was on a panel last week at AIM where we were talking about this. I mean, it's not a direct challenge at all. In fact, overall, it's a really good news story, because what it means is that over the last decade, when there's been very favorable lending conditions, this tells me that a lot of new investors have come to this market, right? So that's great. That's great news. We have a much more diverse, much bigger base of investors than we did a decade ago. But what it also tells me, I was really surprised at just how much bigger the fee management platforms have become. The third-party management platforms have become. The average size of the top 50 management portfolios is way bigger, like 60% bigger than it was a decade ago. Over the same period, the average portfolio size of the top 50 owners has gone down 20%. So more fragmentation of ownership, more properties are fee managed than they used to be. And what that means is the way that people adopt technology is different from how it was a decade ago, right? It was anyone who gets trained in sales and marketing for a vendor in multifamily, it's really ingrained into you that you're supposed to go after the COO and the CIO of the biggest owner operators that you can find, because that's the easiest way. Those people have the greatest latitude to buy many units at the same time. So for any software company, that's always been the center of the bullseye. I don't think I'm not sure that it is anymore. I mean, it is for a certain type of organization, but the average company that's implementing PropTech now is likely to be relatively small. It's likely to be relatively fee managed, if you see what I mean. So if you think about PropTech, so things like connectivity, IoT, so like smart buildings, sensors, like any technology like that, I think most of the time you're not selling it to the COO of a REIT. Like, that's not the person you're mostly selling it to. You're selling it to an individual property or a cluster of properties where you have to sell to like an asset manager and a regional, and the decisions are made on the basis of underwriting, right? They're not thinking about it in terms of, all right, well, across my 100,000 units, what do I want my operating platform to look like? They're thinking about, does this physical stuff that I'm going to put in my property improve that property's performance, or doesn't it? And so you just have many sort of marginal decisions that I think are made in a different way from the way that we traditionally think of when we think of buying technology. So yeah, I think the panel that I was on last week is really interesting. It was with a couple of smaller owners who had devised their own way of evaluating technologies. So they'd rolled out technologies that were, you wouldn't have seen them on the trade show floor at Optech, for example. They'd gone out and looked elsewhere. Interestingly, they both found single family suppliers to solve these particular problems that they talked about. But I generally think there's probably going to be more and more of that, like just because the market overall is getting less and less like these big sort of owner operators that we conventionally think of when we think about multifamily technology.
Very fascinating conversation. I could have gone for hours easily. I'm hoping that this is gonna like be the segue into maybe doing a second episode, because I had so many other topics I wanted to cover with you, and obviously I ran out of time trying to stay within an hour of our conversation. I'd like to ask you in closing, right? What are some closing thoughts to wrap up our conversation, or maybe an answer to a question I wish I would have answered in this context and I didn't, for whatever reason I didn't have a chance to, or I didn't think about?
So my general thing on centralization, like my view is whatever work needs to be done in a multifamily property should be done wherever it can be done the most efficiently. So wherever it delivers the best resident experience, wherever it can be done to the highest degree of reliability and the most quickly. Right. So if you think about the Happy Force example, what I like about that is that there's just this layer of activity where that is better served by just having a bench of people handling that stuff remotely. Like that's a really good assignment of effort to a task. Ditto the AI model that we talked about, the triage and dispatch. Like some models like that, I think serve this interest of specialization, which is I think what we talk about centralization, but I think specialization is more the thing that we're really trying to accomplish. If I were going to give somebody, if somebody asked me how do I make progress on centralization, I would say start with admin. I think many of the tasks that we assign to assistant property managers are tasks that they probably don't enjoy that much. Like there are some people who really enjoy accounting. I don't think most people do though. there are probably some people who enjoy doing collections, but again, I don't think most people like calling people, asking them to pay their rent, right? Yeah. So when you think about tasks like that, there are better ways of doing it than just saying, let's get the APM to do it. And if you can move those tasks into a more central or a more specialized environment, that's probably the least difficult of the centralization tasks. And if you can get that right, you've got a much better shot at doing the rest better. So that would generally be my wrap up advice.
Very fascinating, Dom. I hope to get you back here to continue the conversation in the future. Thank you again for your time. You've been very generous with your time coming here to talk with me and to share this with the audience. It's very powerful. Thank you again.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Everybody, this is Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host. We'll wrap it up right here. I hope to see you back here soon. Have a great day.